Hi, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. Welcome. Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms. We're on book 3, chapters 31 and 32. Before we start, I want to talk about an email that I got. Hold on a second here. Let me grab that. Dear Jimmy, I didn't understand the relationship of what you used to describe the 9 elements encountered in combat compared to business. Can you elaborate? Thank you for your email. We got at least 5 of these emails asking about that 9 elements of combat that the Marine Corps Leadership Manual publishes. And what I did is when the 2009 crash came, I shared that with employees. I think perhaps I even blogged about it. But in any case, in any crisis situation, these elements are not reserved for combat because actually business is legitimate combat. So I'm showing you the 9 elements now. And I used it in that downturn, as I mentioned, of '09, because that was a serious crash. But if you think about it, it also happened after 9/11 and after COVID. And if you've been around a while, anytime a crisis happens, these elements kick in. Regardless if you're in a war or you're in a financial business crisis, a health crisis, that these are the elements that you should be aware of. So let me just talk briefly about that and how I related it to business warfare. Violent, unnerving sights and sounds. In the 2009, if you were around like Jimmy was, there were horrible headlines, just horrible headlines. Wall Street didn't know what to do. Lehman Brothers, which was the 4th largest bank, filed for bankruptcy. I mean, it's just amazing amount of violent sights and sounds. Not artillery shells like Lieutenant Henry is experiencing, but other things that were really just devastating to businesses and people's lives. If you think about it, the Dow Jones average dropped more than 50% from its peak in '07. You can look this up yourself. But that decline was compared to the 1929 crash. And if you were in business like Jimmy was, the phone simply stopped ringing. Nobody was doing business. Very, very scary time. Very scary time. Most people, still remember a Wall Street Journal headline, business people just didn't know what to do. Well, what you have to do is keep moving forward. If you know anything about combat or business warfare or any warfare, you don't stop. You keep moving forward, which is what you'll see Lieutenant Henry is doing when he was retreating. But in this case, in '09, you just keep moving forward. And one of the reasons we survived that is we kept moving forward. There's many stories I could tell you, but this is not the place. Casualties. When you get fired in a business, when you're working for a company and you get fired, it's like dying, isn't it? I mean, your income stops, whether or not you get a severance pay, whatever happens, if you get fired, you're a casualty, right? Jimmy's been fired 3 times. I remember the first time I was fired, it was 2 days. I was a teacher at the time. It was 2 days before school started, and I was called up. I called in, they called me, and they said, "You can't come back." It's a long story. I defended a kid prior to that. I'll tell you about that sometime. But 2 days before school starts, as a teacher, you can't get a job. It was impossible. I was a casualty, right? The principal didn't like me, or he didn't like what I did, whatever. Didn't like that I challenged his authority. In fact, one of the rules of business is don't challenge authority unless you're ready to get killed. In any case, casualties happen when crises in business happen, when combat situations. I had a client once who said, "Why do you always have to compare business to warfare?" That's not right. Well, of course it's right. You use terms like killing the competition, right? Don't you use terms like that if you're in business? We got to kill the competition. In 2009, when this market, when everything crashed, more than 15 million people were unemployed. That's 6% of the population. 15 million. That's a lot of casualties. Confusion and lack of information. This is true of any crisis. Lots of information at the time and probably all wrong. When the 2009 crash, 2008 was crashing, there was lots of stuff floating around and it was all wrong, just like it was wrong in COVID. Well, Jimmy, I don't know how you could say that. Well, read, and analyze. Do your research. You're going to find out facts now that in retrospect, how come we didn't know that? Well, you did know that. You did know that. But people, not saying who, were controlling information. People who control information, and that's why one of the things that COVID did as a result is put a tremendous distrust in our institutions because they were basically lying to us. Actually, if you think about it, and this is Jimmy's opinion, you don't have to agree, the shutdown actually caused more harm than the virus itself. Now, it doesn't matter what you think about the virus, where it came from. Illness is illness. But the confusion and lack of information when everybody just when we shut the business down, we're still recovering from that. You understand this? In the day I'm recording this, there's still rampant lack of information, and also we're suffering from the effects of that. Just think about commercial space. Just think about what's going on with inflation. Just think about all this. So greed, I would say, Jimmy would say, is probably the underlying reason for this crash in 2009, 2008. And you can read about it, go online. There's been movies made about it. And then you can formulate your own opinion. But greed, hubris also, but greed is at the bottom of all things. If you really want to know the truth about stuff, here's a hint. Follow the money. Just follow the money. It's almost always about money. Always about money. If you get fired and you have no money, guess what? You're screwed. If you get fired and you have money, you can survive for one. Survival is money. We talked about this in several analyses when we looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're making financial decisions or health decisions, you have to have accurate information. If you don't have accurate information, it's like navigation. If you're navigating and you're 1 degree off course, in a day, you're really off course. You understand that? So you need accurate information. And by the way, just FYI, it's not always from Google. Google's a great resource, but you have to be wary and careful of who you're reading and why you're reading. Just like these analyses. Jimmy doesn't expect you to believe everything he's saying about A Farewell to Arms. He's saying these things about Farewell to Arms to stimulate your own thinking, for heaven's sakes. You've got to learn to think for yourself. You cannot rely on everybody's opinion. If you follow everybody's opinion, remember, we've proved this over and over and over again. Sometimes the majority of people are simply wrong. For example, Galileo, right? And his position about does the earth go around the sun and the sun around the earth? They wanted to burn him at the stake for the truth. So you have to think these things through. You have to. So in conflict, unfortunately, it's not always possible to get accurate information. That's why the study of history, the study of literature, study gives you examples of what has happened and what could happen. Ladies and gentlemen, all you have to do is study history, and you'll be rewarded with remarkable discoveries about what's going on around you now. You think that this is all new? You think that some of the things you're going through today are all new? This never happened before, Jimmy. Of course it did. Of course it did. You just got to look hard at them. You haven't been looking hard at them. Right? Feelings of isolation. In 2009 economic crisis, when you think about that crisis, if you were around, and even if you weren't around, I'm telling you now, the rates of suicide, and you can look this up, increased in American and European particularly in men and in countries at the higher levels of job loss. As I said, when you lose your job, and let's say you're a high-paying executive and suddenly you got fired, what do? I remember watching, when I used to watch it, 60 Minutes, and there was a guy, I had just gotten fired and gotten 3 jobs after being fired as a teacher. And then I was fired a second time. And the second time I was fired, it was easier because I had a job in my back pocket when I challenged power. That's a long story. I remember watching 60 Minutes, and there was executives from Lehman Brothers complaining about they were fired. They didn't know what to do. Oh, woe is me. Oh, woe is me. And I remember looking at the interview and saying, what a putz. Because you don't say, woe is me when you get fired. You pick up yourself and you go and you do something about it. I'm not saying commit acts of violence, but you do something about it. You find another job. Well, Jimmy, I was an executive. I don't know how to flip hamburgers. Well, learn for heaven's sakes. Think about this. So when crisis happens, isolations, you feel alone. You are alone, but you're not alone. You are not alone. You're never alone. You're only alone if you think you're alone. Well, we never know each other, do we, Jimmy? No, of course you don't. No man can know another man, truly, right? We don't have glass heads. But look at yourself. And if you got fired, was it your fault? Was it the situation around you? Was it the conflict? Was it your boss hated you? What? Right? In the days of old, when knights were bold, right? They would fire people haphazardly. They just wiped out floor. I remember one time my boss when I was beginning as a copywriter, he went to lunch, he came back, he found out all his stuff outside his office. They cleared him out. He was a great guy, an interesting guy. He taught me a lot, but they got him. Advertising was a cutthroat business. In any case, feelings of isolation, just look at what COVID did to us. Communications breakdown. By the way, Jimmy didn't do that. Jimmy kept the doors open because he was selling soap for automatic soap dispensers. So he declared himself at the time an indispensable business. And the rules were different. They would keep Walmart open. They would keep these big companies open. So Jimmy, being a little company, just said, well, what the hell? I'm staying open. And we did. And that's why we survived. Anyway, communication breakdown, right? Individual discomfort, fatigue, fear, stress, all the rest of those 9 elements you're looking at. And while it's certainly not like real warfare, right? It's not really, you don't have artillery shells, exploding next to you, bullets flying at you, seeing your compatriots getting killed. Psychologically, fear is fear. Remember Delano Roosevelt? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. What a great quote, right? What is fear? What are you afraid of? And how do you overcome your fear? How does a Navy SEAL overcome his fear? Let's face it. If you're not afraid of getting shot or something, dramatic like that, then you're probably a little nuts. But you overcome your fear. How do you do that? Practice. You practice. How do you get to be a great, basketball? You practice. You know how many free throws Michael Jordan shot? Well, Jimmy, that's not conflict. Well, sure it is. Are you telling me that a basketball game is not conflict? Who are you kidding? Of course it's a conflict. It has rules, right? You get penalized when you break rules. You keep score. Your object of the game is to defeat and, humiliate the competition, right? So fear does strange things to human beings. Look at boxers. If a boxer's afraid of another boxer when he gets in the ring, he's going to lose, period. He'll lose. He will lose. So Jimmy just wanted you to know that in a life and death situation, the definitions of life and death will vary. For example, if you're waiting for a test result from a cancer screening, How are you feeling? How are you feeling? If you're wondering if you're going to get fired because of the rumor mill and, oh, Jesus Christ, they're going to lay everybody off in a couple of days. How are you feeling? How are you feeling? I've worked for companies before I started my own business where when that word came down that they had lost a client, everybody was walking around with their heads down. They were like just crazy. They were just fear. Everybody was afraid. Is that the way you want to lead your life? It's not always about bullets, but it is always, always about fear and survival and determination, isn't it? So let's see how Lieutenant Henry reacts to this. We left him off, he was in the river, right? Floating. He had run away because he thought he was going to be shot, and he was floating in the river holding on to a piece of wood. Thank you for your email, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. Okay, here we go. Chapter 31. You do not know how long you are in a river when the current moves swiftly. It seems a long time, and it may be very short. The water was cold and in flood, and many things passed that had been floated off the banks when the river rose. I was lucky. Remember, why didn't Jimmy highlight that? Remember the role of luck? Right? I was lucky to have a timber to hold on to. I don't know why it's not taking. Anyway, I was lucky to have a timber to hold on to, and I lay in the icy water with my chin on the wood, holding as easily as I could with both hands. I was afraid of cramps, and I hoped that we would move toward the shore. Who's we? Who's we? It's him in the wood. We would move toward. He's not with anybody else. We went down the river in a long curve. It was beginning to be light enough so I could see the brushes along the shoreline. There was a brush island ahead, and the current moved toward the shore. I wondered if I should take off my boots and clothes and try to swim ashore, but I decided not to. I had never thought of anything but that I would reach the shore some way, and I would be in a bad position if I landed barefoot. I had to get to Mestre some way. I watched the shore come close and then swing away and then come closer again. 1 second, please. I want to check something. Okay, good, thanks. We were floating more slowly. The shore was very close now, and I could see twigs on the willow bush. The timber swung slowly so that the bank was behind me, and I knew that we were in an eddy. You know what an eddy is in a river? It's not moving, right? It's an eddy. We went slowly around, just slowly. As I saw the bank again, very close now, I tried holding with one arm and kicking and swimming the timber toward the bank with the other, but I did not bring it any closer. I was afraid. Fear. We would move out of the eddy, and holding with one hand, I drew up my feet so that they were against the side of the timber and shoved hard toward the bank. I remember he's painting with words beautifully, isn't he? You can visualize what this guy's doing. I could see the brush, but even with my momentum and swimming as hard as I could, the current was taking me away. You know, currents are nothing to fool around with if you're a swimmer. And if you are a swimmer, you know that. You know currents are really unpredictable forces of nature. I thought then that I would drown because of my boots, but I thrashed and fought through the water, and when I looked up, the bank was coming toward me, and I kept thrashing and swimming in a heavy-footed panic until I reached it. Did you ever try to swim with shoes on? Not easy. I hung to the willow branch and did not have strength to pull myself up, but I knew I would not drown now. So he's holding on to a willow. It had never occurred to me on the timber that I might drown. This is important. It had never occurred to him when he was holding on to that timber that he would drown. Never thought of drowning. I wonder why. Because if he did, he would panic. You see what I'm saying? I felt hollow and sick in my stomach and chest from the effort, and I held to the branches and I waited. And when the sick feeling was gone, I pulled into the willow bushes and rested again, my arms around the bush and holding tight with my hands to the branches. And then I crawled out, pushed on through the willows and onto the bank. It was half daylight and I saw no one. I lay flat on the bank and I heard the river and the rain. After a while, I got up and started along the bank, and I knew there was no bridge across the river until Estancia. I thought, he knows, this is the interesting thing to Jimmy, that this guy knows the geography of where he's at. He understands the geography, so he must have been in country for a long time driving that ambulance, right? This is not that he just started driving the ambulance and he doesn't know the countryside. He knows the countryside, which makes his decision to leave the line, leave the road, the main road with side roads, to me, very interesting. And it should interest you in your analysis of Lieutenant Henry's motivations. I thought that I might be opposite San Vito. I began to think out loud what I should do. Think out loud. Ahead there was a ditch running into the river. I went toward it. So far I had seen no one, and I sat down by some bushes along the bank of the ditch, took off my shoes, and emptied them of water. I took off my coat, took my wallet with my papers and my money all wet in it out of the inside pocket, and then wrung the coat out. I took off my trousers, and I wrung them too, and then my shirt and my underclothing. I slapped and rubbed myself, and then dressed again. I had lost my cap. Why does he slap himself? Well, he's cold, right? But he has no fire. Needs a fire to dry this stuff out, but he dresses again. Before I put my coat on, I cut the cloth stars off my sleeves, and I put them in the inside pocket with my money. Why is he doing that? He's cutting the cloth stars that designate him as a lieutenant. You know why. They were shooting officers, right? My money was wet, but it was all right. I counted it, and there were 3,000 and some lira. It's a lot of money he had. Don't forget where he gets his money. Drafts from his grandfather. He drafts it. My clothes felt wet and clammy, and I slapped my arms to keep the circulation going. I had woven underwear, and I did not think that I would catch cold if I kept moving. They had taken my pistol at the road, and I put the holster under my coat. I had no cape, and it was cold in the rain. He's in bad shape here. I started walking up the bank of the canal, and it was daylight, and the country was wet, low, and dismal looking. The fields were bare and wet. Long way away, I could see a campanile, a bell tower, rising out of the plain. I came up onto the road. Ahead, I saw some troops coming down the road. I limped alongside of the road, and they passed me and paid no attention to me. They were a machine gun detachment going up the river. I went down the road. Why didn't they pay attention to Lieutenant Henry? Well, he's a straggler. They're off to fight, right? That day, I crossed the Venetian plain. It's a low-level country, and under the rain, it's even flatter. Toward the sea, there are salt marshes and very few roads, and the roads all go along the river mouths to the sea. And to cross country, you must go along the paths beside the canals. I was working across the country from the north to the south, and had crossed 2 railway lines and many roads, and finally I came out at the end of the path onto the railway line where it ran beside a marsh. It was the main line from Venice to Trieste, with a high solid embankment, a solid roadbed, and double track. And down the tracks, away was a flag station, and I could see soldiers on guard. Up the line, there was a bridge over a stream that flowed into the marsh, and I could see a guard, too, on the bridge. Crossing the fields to the north, I had seen a train pass on this railroad, railroad, pardon me, visible a long way across the flat plain. And then I thought that a train might come from Portuguero. See, he knows geography. I watched the guards and lay down on the embankment so that I could see both ways along the track. The guard at the bridge walked away up the line toward where I lay, and then he turned and went back toward the bridge. I lay and was hungry, and I waited for the train. The one I had seen was so long that the engine moved very slowly, and I was sure that I could get aboard. And after I had almost given up hoping for one, I saw a train coming. The engine coming straight on grew larger slowly. I looked at the guard on the bridge. He was walking on the near side of the bridge, but on the other side of the tracks, and that would put him out of sight when the train passed. I watched the engine come nearer. It was working hard, and I could see that there were many cars. I knew there would be guards on the train, and I tried to see where they were, but keeping out of sight, I could not. The engine was almost to where I was lying, and when it came opposite, working and puffing even on the level, and I saw the engineer pass, I stood up and stepped up close to the passing cars. If the guards were watching, I was less suspicious object standing beside the track. Several closed freight cars passed, and then I saw a low open car of the sort that they call gondolas coming, covered with canvas. I stood until it was almost past, and then I jumped and caught the rear hand rods and pulled up. I crawled down between the gondola and the shelter of the high freight car behind. I didn't think that anyone had seen me. I was holding to the hand rods and crouching low, my feet on the coupling. We were almost opposite the bridge, and I remembered the guard. As we passed him, he looked at me. He was a boy, and his helmet was too big for him. I stared at him contemptuously, and he looked away. He thought that I had something to do with the train. He thought, how does he know that? This is his speculation. He's a first-person narrator. If the third-person narrator told us that, then we would believe it. But this is his speculation because he looked at him contemptuously. How do you look at someone contemptuously? Do you know? Have you ever looked at someone with contempt? With contempt. We were past, and I saw him still looking uncomfortable, watching the other cars as I stooped to see how the canvas was fastened. It had grommets, and it was laced down to the edge with a cord. So I took out my knife, cut the cord, and put my arm under. There were hard bulges under the canvas that tightened in the rain. I looked up and ahead. There was a guard on the freight car ahead, but he was looking forward. I let go of the handrails, and I ducked under the canvas, and my forehead hit something that gave me a violent bump, and I felt blood on my face. But I crawled on in, and I lay flat, and then I turned around, and I fastened down the canvas. I was in under the canvas with guns. You remember that earlier I told you to pay attention to this, right? The camouflage with the guns. Remember that when we first started? And I said, every word counts. And you may not have believed me. Well, where is he now? Under the canvas with guns. They smelled cleanly of oil and grease, and I lay and listened to the rain on the canvas and the clicking of the car over the rails. There was a little light that came through, and I lay and looked at the guns. They had their canvas jackets on. I thought that they must have been sent ahead from the Third Army. The bump on my forehead was swollen, and I stopped the bleeding by lying still and letting it coagulate. And then I picked away at the dried blood except over the cut. It was nothing. I had no handkerchief, but feeling with my fingers, I washed away where the dried blood had been with the rainwater that dripped from the canvas, and I wiped it clean with the sleeve of my coat. I didn't want to look conspicuous. I knew that I would have to get out before they got to Mestre, because that they would be taking care of these guns. They had no guns to lose or forget about, and I was terrifically hungry. Isn't this interesting so far? Chapter 32. Lying on the floor of the flat car with the guns beside me under the canvas, I was wet, cold, and very hungry. Finally, I rolled over and lay flat on my stomach with my head on my arms. My knee was stiff, but it had been very satisfactory. Valentini had done a fine job. Remember Valentini? He was the doctor who operated on him. I had done half the retreat on foot and swum part of the Tagliamento with his knee. It was his knee, all right. The other knee was my knee. Doctors did things to you, and then it was not your body anymore. The head was mine, and the inside of the belly. It was very hungry in there. I could feel it turn over on itself. The head of mine, but not to use, not to think with, only to remember and not too much remember. The head was mine, but not to use, not to think, with only to remember and not too much to remember. Very interesting, isn't it? What he just said. Very interesting. I could remember Catherine, but I knew I would get crazy if I thought about her when I was not sure yet I would see her, so I would not think about her. Only about her a little, only about her with the car going slowly and clickingly and some light coming through the canvas and my lying with Catherine on the floor of the car. Stream of consciousness? Note the structure of the sentences. Hard as the floor of a car to lie, not thinking, only feeling, having been away too long, the clothes wet and the floor moving only a little each time, and lonesome inside, and alone, and wet, with wet clothing and a hard floor for a wife. Stream of consciousness. Remember that. You did not love the floor of a flat car, nor the guns, nor canvas jackets, and the smell of Vaseline metal, or a canvas that rain leaked through, although it is very fine under the canvas and pleasant with guns. But you loved someone else, whom now you knew was not even to be pretended there. You, seeing now very clearly and coldly, yet not so coldly as clearly and emptily. Not so coldly as clearly and emptily. And you saw emptily, lying on your stomach, having been present when one army moved back and another one moved forward, and you had lost your cars and your men, as a floor walker loses the stock in his department in a fire. And there was, however, no insurance. You are out of it now. You had no more obligation. If they shoot floor walkers after a fire in the department store because they spoke with an accent they had always had, then certainly the floor walkers would not be expected to return when the store opened again for business. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're seeing and reading here is Lieutenant Henry's logic for deserting. This is his logic. He's reasoning floor walkers after a fire, if you shoot them because they had an accent, they always did that, so you really shouldn't return to the store when it opened again. They might seek other employment, if there was any other employment and the police did not get them. Who? The floor walkers. Why is he comparing this to floor walkers at a store, at a department store? Anger was washed away in the river along with any obligation. His anger was washed away with any obligation. I want you to think about this word, obligation. Although that ceased when the carabinieri put his hands on my collar. Although that, what's that? Although that, all right, a second. Although that, what's that pronoun? What ceased? Obligation ceased when the carabinieri grabbed his collar. I would like to have had the uniform off, although I did not care much about the outward forms. I had taken off the stars, but that was for convenience. It was no point of honor. I was not against them. I was through. I wish them all luck. You know what rationalization is? Look up rationalization. Rational, when you're rationalizing. Rationalization. Look it up. I wish them all luck. 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 There were good ones, the brave ones, the calm ones, the sensible ones, and they deserved it. They deserved it. What's it? It. They deserved it. Luck. But it was not my show anymore, and I wish this bloody train would get to Mestre and I would eat and stop thinking. I would have to stop. Piani would tell them that they had shot me. How does he know that? Does he know that? They went through the pockets and took the papers of people they shot. They would not have my papers. You see how he's reasoning and thinking this through? He still has his papers. So even if Piani says that, they're not going to find his papers. They might call me drowned. I wondered what they would hear in the States, dead from wounds and other causes. Good Christ, I was hungry. You see how he's always hungry? I wondered what had become of the priest at the mess and Rinaldi. He was probably at Perdone. If they had not gone further back, so the retreat, right? Well, I would never see him now. I would never see any of them. That life was over. I did not think that he had syphilis. It was not a serious disease anyway if you took it in time, they said. Do you know if it's a serious disease? You know what happens if you get syphilis and don't treat it? Look it up. You go kind of like nuts. But he would worry, and I would worry too if I had it. Anyone would worry. I was not made to think. I was made to eat. Ladies and gentlemen, there lies one of the important statements of the book. This is the narrator talking to us, narrating to us as he's in the train with the guns underneath the canvas, right? Retreating, trying to go wherever the hell he's going. I was not made to think. I was made to eat. My God, yes. Eat and drink and sleep with Catherine. Tonight, maybe. No, that was impossible. But tomorrow night, and a good deal meal and sheets and never going away again except together. Probably have to go to Dan quickly. She would go. I knew she would go. When would we go? That was something to think about, and it was getting dark, and I lay and thought about where we would go. There were many places. You remember Gone with the Wind? Today's another day. Remember her on the hillside in that dramatic scene in Atlanta as it was burning? I'll never go hungry again. I'll never go hungry again, she said. Oh, there's a typo here, right? Logic. Should be not logic. Logic. Sorry. Okay, there it is. Right? All right. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is Jimmy. That was book 3. Let's go back and review that again. That was book 3, chapters 31 and 32. That's the end of book 3. We're going to be going into book 4 now. Okay? So learn more by watching the next reading of the novel, Reading with Jimmy. That's what we want you to do. And then we're going to analyze book 3 like we analyzed the first and the second book. You should be formulating your own opinions. You should be thinking deeply about these topics because they're very important. For example, how you overcome fear is probably a profound topic because, ladies and gentlemen, everybody's afraid. Children are afraid, right? But they don't know why they're afraid. Sometimes even adults don't know why they're afraid. Why are you afraid, right? And what are you afraid of? Death? We don't want to talk about that now. Maybe we'll get into it in the analysis. Remember, if you have questions, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com, Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. I love getting your email. Please send them through. I will not answer every one of them. I will try to. But in any case, we would love to hear from you. Thanks for coming. Look forward to seeing you for book 4.